Guys, welcome in. It is the final video on the 2025 Formula One season, and I'll get right out ahead of it. I apologize this video is coming late because I know it is, because I've gotten totally swept up in the holiday rush, and I just really put off making this video for far too long. But regardless, I wanted to make it just because this will be actually the first season where I've actually done a video, season beginning to season end. And so we're going to add it to the channel just in case as we get 2026 started and start counting down for the 2026 season to come around. Only in just a month and a half, 2 months, just like that. So it'll be here. But regardless, we are going to be taking a look at the predictions that we made before the season began with our season predictions, as well as I'm just going to go ahead and use this opportunity to do a little, one sentence recap for each team on the grid. But let's go ahead, without further ado, we've waited long enough to make this video. Let's go ahead, jump on into this thing, have our 2025 predictions and one-liner team reviews. Let's kick this thing off right and go through one team at a time and give my little one or two sentence recap depending on the team. Some teams had a lot more going on this season than others. We'll begin at the very top with McLaren. And obviously, I think the only thing you can really talk about with McLaren is that they dominate the constructors. And while they did leave the drivers way too far into the season, you can honestly say that was maybe one of the most dominant runs a single constructor has had in a single season. They scored like 800 however many points, and obviously Oscar and Lando finishing in the top three of the drivers' standings absolutely is a season to remember for Papaya fans. For next up, we have Mercedes, who I think has proven this season to have a very solid lineup, obviously with George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, as we now head into an engine regulation where Mercedes is expected to perform very well. It'll be very interesting to see if Kimi Antonelli and George Russell are ready for the moment, and if they can build a car good enough to once again challenge towards a world championship. Time will tell. Next up, we have Red Bull, or should I basically say Max Verstappen. This was the ultimate culmination, I think, of an era where it was obviously a car Max Verstappen could drive and no one else could. Obviously, Max went through multiple teammates over the course of this regulation, and this season, I think, just proves that if you give Max a car that can fight for the front, he will be there. Next up, we have Ferrari, and I think the only thing you can really say about Ferrari is I'm not sure there was a single team more ready for the season to end than them, and thank God it finally did. Let's go ahead and move on now to Williams, who honestly have had a season to remember the other way, which is obviously they welcome in Carlos Sainz into the team, replacing Logan Sargent. And obviously there was a lot of question marks. Williams over the last few years has struggled, to say the least. You see an odd result here or there, but I think this was the first time that really you saw a very, very consistent car. I think James Vowles has done a very good job, and I'm very excited to see what they can do moving forward. Next up, we have VCarb, RB, Racing Bulls, whatever you want to call them. This, I think, is another instance of, the sister team, the baby team, producing drivers with aspirations of a Red Bull seat. Isaac Hadjar, the one getting the call up going into 2026, will be interesting to see if he can step up to the plate and help, Red Bull develop a car that someone else besides Max can drive. But VCarb once again settling back into the Red Bull Junior team stanza after actually having a pretty solid season. But I think going forward, it's pretty obvious they're getting right back into their position. Aston Martin next, one of the other teams on the grid that I think was praying that this season would get over quicker. I think it became pretty obvious that they didn't have a lot of, investment into this car, or even mental or physical or fiscal into this car. And they are definitely waiting for Adrian Newey, new team principal Adrian Newey, to take over starting in 2026. So I think all eyes will turn back on for Aston Martin going forward into 2026. Next up, we have Haas F1 team. Obviously, that's my team. Very excited to see what the future holds for them as they welcome in Toyota into the title sponsorship position, or should I say Toyota Gazoo Racing, TGR. And so very excited to see what they have there. Obviously, first season with the new pairing of Esteban Ocon and Ollie Behrman. I think both of them had kind of very similar trajectory to the Williams team. You had Esteban Ocon with some really solid results early in the season, and then Ollie Behrman absolutely turned it on, culminating himself in a P4 in Mexico. So a bit of a tale of two halves of the season for Haas, but I'm excited to see them step into a new era of regulation, especially with the help from Toyota. Next up, we have Sauber, the final year in which we can call them that as they lose title sponsors or title, not I guess not title, but backing naming rights to the team as they now transition to Audi going into 2026. But what a year for Sauber. I think a lot of people were not expecting a whole lot from them going this season, but ultimately I think it culminated in a showcase for Gabi Bortoleto, who showed a lot of pace here and there throughout the season and took advantage when he could, as well as Nico Hulkenberg finally getting his first F1 podium. So definitely a very memorable season for Sauber as they transition away from the sport and into Audi. And then last but not least, Alpine rounding out the grid for us before we welcome in Cadillac next season. Alpine rounds it out for us here. And I think it's pretty safe to say that they might have failed pretty much every expectation we could have had for them this season. After the way they finished last season, charging up the constructors before ultimately with finishing, what was it, P6? They were consistently at the back basically every single race weekend. And anytime they weren't, I think it was very clearly the outlier, not the norm. All right, let's go ahead, transition now into the reason we're all here. We made some predictions before the season began, and we are now here to take a look and see how right we were on some and how wrong we were everywhere else. We're going to talk about our world champion, our constructors champion, basically who came in second in both the drivers and constructors championships, our number of individual race winners, the number of race seats lost, and then, as always with any of our predictions, we rounded out with our one crazy prediction, but this time it was for the entire season. It's going to get a lot of there's a lot of feelings in this one, and we're going to go into it not too in depth because I think a lot of this actually was covered in our previous video where we went over my predictions for the drivers and constructors standings from top to bottom for both. So let's go ahead and not even beat around the bush anymore. Let's start with my prediction for world champion. I went for Charles Leclerc. We've covered this multitude times over the course of this season, especially in our mid-season review, as well as our constructors and driver standings predictions review. And so obviously I think it's safe to say that I had more faith in Ferrari than I should have. And while this did look pretty tough mid-season, it only got worse from there as Ferrari were consistently one of, if not the most disappointing team on the entire grid. All right, next up, let's move on to constructors champions, and I went with McLaren. I think this one was the very obvious solution to our Charles Leclerc world champion prediction, was knowing that you can't trust Ferrari as a constructor, so you go with the team you should have trusted for both championships off the rip. So McLaren obviously ended up walking away with this one. But I will say this does prove that if you go back and watch my season predictions video, I talk about how McLaren are going to take points off of each other and allow someone like a Charles Leclerc to kind of sneak in and potentially snag the championship or out from under him, potentially at the death. And while it wasn't Charles, it was Max. And so my prediction was valid. The result and selection is the problem. Let's move on now to best of the rest in the Drivers' Championship, aka who finished P2. For this one, I went with Lando Norris, kind of leaning into what I just talked about with the Constructors title. I think the McLaren finishing second in the Drivers in my version of history makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you had two McLarens in the top three in reality, and so I don't think this is actually too close, and it actually was a brief instance away from potentially being correct. So I'm just saying, while it was incorrect in the end, I cooked here, and I missed that one ingredient, and it was trusting Ferrari, I think, more than anything. Let's move on now to best of the rest in the constructors. And now for my drivers champion to come true, I needed this to be Ferrari. I don't think you could come lower than, well, I say that. I don't think you could, as Ferrari, finish lower than second and potentially also win the World Drivers' Championship. And so I went with Ferrari here, and boy, oh boy, did they let me down. And while they obviously didn't finish like last or anything, of the top teams, they were very comfortably last. And so I think it was a disappointing year on all fronts for the Scuderia. All right, let's get into some of our more fun predictions. We made a prediction for the number of individual race winners on the grid this season. I went with 7 because I was really leaning into the hype after the 2024 season that a lot of teams would potentially be battling for wins. And while it was true to a certain degree, McLaren started the season, I think, so hot that it really was an instance where there was no wins up for grabs. And then as the season wore on, there was just very few actual wins up for grabs. We did have 4 individual race winners, and so while it might have been one of those on paper, this season was still very good. But in terms of individual race winners, I think I got swept up in the hype a little bit too much. Next up, we have how many race seats lost. So obviously going into this season, we had a numerous number of rookies coming onto the grid. And so when it comes to race seats lost, this one I think was kind of really up in the air because you just really did not know what was going to happen. Were we going to have a rookie crash out so spectacularly they weren't brought back? Would we have a veteran driver who was eventually let go? Obviously, I think we had a little bit of both because while I predicted 1, it was ultimately 2 with both Jack Doohan and Yuki Tsunoda unfortunately losing their race seats by the time the season basically ended. And so while we did get this one wrong, I think our logic again was right. And at the same time, I kind of hate predicting people to lose race seats. There was one obvious one. I think it was pretty clear in the beginning of the season that Alpine had no confidence in Jack Doohan as a prospect when they signed Franco Colapinto for a big multi-year contract. So that one was basically a given. It was just one of those of, was anyone else? I didn't think so, but turns out I was wrong. And then last but not least, as always in our predictions videos, we wrap things up, this time for actually the final time in 2025. Our final predictions review for the season is our one crazy prediction for the entire season. And I went crazy with this one, but it turns out, once again, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. I was very close to getting this one. I predicted Haas F1 team to get their first podium in team history. And it is safe to say that I was losing my damn mind in Mexico when Ollie Bearman was running in P3 for a lot of the race. His race start, the way he ran that race was perfect. And boy, oh boy, was I losing my mind when they decided to pit him to cover people off, ultimately giving Max Verstappen the podium himself. But a P4, absolutely stellar performance. It matches their best, It was their best results since 2018? Something like that. It's been a long time. Ollie obviously had the 10 out of 10 weekend that weekend, and I was asking for the moon and back to get that podium, but at the same time, I still think it was on the cards. But guys, there we have it. We had some ups, we had some downs, and we had a lot of close calls with these predictions. So I hope you enjoyed the 2025 season, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you. You're a real one. Leave a like rating on the video because it really helps me out, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm already in the throes of planning the content for 2026 and leading up to 2026. So stay tuned on the channel for that. Other than that, we'll get back to some regularly scheduled sim racing, as well as some potentially other fun things as well. But guys, that is going to wrap it up for me here in this one. It will officially conclude the 2025 season for the channel, and we now all eyes turn forward to February for preseason testing number 1. We'll see if we get any leaks from it, but I, for one, am more than excited and more ready for some new stuff, some new blood. Cadillac coming in, I think, is going to give us a lot of excitement in 2026. But guys, that is going to wrap it up for me here. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.